Hello, and thank you for taking the time to talk about generative artificial intelligence for Agilists, Scrum Masters, Agile Delivery Leads, Agile Coaches, and other proponents of Agile ways of working. We'll talk a little bit today about how some of the recent advancements in artificial intelligence, especially generative AI, can help those of us who are helping create, amplify, and extend agility in teams and organizations. For today's agenda, first we'll talk about a brief history of artificial intelligence and what artificial intelligence is at the highest level, including generative AI. We really want to disambiguate the subset of generative AI from AI as an overarching discipline. From there, aligning AI and Agile values as those who work in Agile ways of working and help others to do so, we want to make sure that when we talk about working with AI, we do it in such a way that aligns to Agile values. Then, as is most interesting to me and hopefully to those of you who are watching this video, what can I do with this technology now? Less theory, more action. How can I put this into place? We'll walk through some high value use cases or scenarios where I find value in Agile ways of working and using AI. Hopefully some of these will be useful for you and your teams as well. Then we'll talk a little bit about understanding the risks and limitations of artificial intelligence. There's definitely some downsides that we need to be cognizant of as we go down this path and this journey. And then finally, moving forward, some suggested next steps. And with that, yes, I do enjoy Scrabble. Among other things, my name is John Halberstadt. Thank you for making the time for this conversation today. I'm the Vice President of Consulting at a company called Lightspeed. My background has been over 25 years in technology throughout all areas of the software development lifecycle. About 15 of those have been in senior leadership roles, SVP, CIO, CTO. And then perhaps most importantly for this conversation, about 6 years of my career have been leading product management and customer experience innovation for an artificial intelligence natural language processing platform. So a lot of this comes from my background and my experience in seeing the promise and some of the perils of artificial intelligence in general. Finally, since this is a presentation for the Bay Area Agile Leadership Network, I want to say big shout out to my friends in San Jose and the broader Bay Area. San Jose is my hometown. Not there anymore, but always very close to my heart. And now I really want to go to Original Joe's. So I miss a lot of things about San Jose. That's definitely one of the big ones. So AI hype is everywhere. Getting past the hype, let's talk about who's actually using some of these technologies today. Well, Microsoft's IntelliCode uses AI to provide code suggestions real time, helping developers write higher quality code faster. Facebook uses Prophet, an AI forecasting tool that uses AI to help identify, predict software bugs and performance issues before they occur. Uber uses Test AI to automatically generate and run test cases, helping make sure that that automation is in place for quick changes and making sure they don't break anything. Salesforce is using AI-driven analytics to analyze user stories and using natural language processing, which we'll talk about in a little bit, helping make sure that requirements are understandable and actionable. And Spotify uses data analytics and AI to predict sprint performance and helping teams set more accurate sprint goals and allocate resources more efficiently. So these are some practical, past the hype type areas where companies are actively using this in really meaningful ways and Agile ways of working and amplifying Agile ways of working today. Good place for us to start. So a very brief introduction to artificial intelligence. What is AI? Well, first of all, like those of us in the Agile community often say that Agile ways of working are an umbrella, and that there are frameworks and approaches like Kanban, Scrum, and scaling approaches, all of that underneath. Similar construct. AI is an umbrella. AI is not just a monolithic thing. Those subfields include things like machine learning and natural language processing, robotics, etc. AI enables machine learning for decision making, deep learning, and leveraging neural networks. AI creates human-like intelligent systems, and that it relies on and learns from data. So a little bit more about AI. All aspects of AI really need extensive data for training. AI, as I think all of us have seen, is rapidly disrupting all industries, some for better, some perhaps not, but including ones that tend to be somewhat laggards, things like healthcare, financial services, and transportation, and especially the government. And AI also presents ethical concerns about creativity, infringement, amplifying the existing bias that we have in many areas of the internet, and privacy as well. So these challenges are not necessarily unique to AI, but AI have certainly taken them to a whole new level. So, as mentioned initially, disambiguating or differentiating generative AI from the overarching entirety of artificial intelligence. What is Gen AI? Well, Gen AI is simply short for generative artificial intelligence. It's that subset of AI that focuses on creating and generating data and content. Generative AI responses can mimic human-like creativity and ingenuity. Mimic may be a very important word to use there. Traditional AI systems primarily work with predefined rules and patterns, but generative AI, and part of what's so exciting and in some cases so concerning, is that it has the capacity to produce new and original information, including text, images, music, etc., things that we thought computers really couldn't do. So, as those who are proponents of the not only tools and processes of Agile, but the underlying and overarching values and principles of Agile ways of working, how do we make sure that we align AI and Agile values? So, artificial intelligence isn't inherently in support of or in conflict with Agile values. Like money, it can be used for things that are good or bad. It really depends on how you spend it. This is the same idea. Some ways that we can think of AI, how it can be used to support and enhance these Agile ways of working and amplifying Agile values. Here's a couple of ideas. So the first is, if we have a principle of individuals and interactions over processes and tools, well, AI tools can help enhance communication and collaboration within Agile teams. Things like chatbots or virtual assistants can help facilitate team communication or assist with routine tasks, allowing our individuals, our creativity, our hearts, and our brains to focus on more meaningful interactions. And I think that's an overarching intent and value of AI, is to not replace humans, but to replace the things that humans are wasting their time and their brains on and their cycles on. Working solutions over comprehensive documentation as an overarching principle of ours. Well, AI-driven automation can help reduce some of those manual documentation efforts. If we do need documentation, and all of us will in our Agile ways of working, how can we not only generate documentation that's usable and useful, but how can we use AI to extract, with tools like NLP tools, extract relevant information from conversations and use those in our documentation. So again, we can use our time for good conversations, collaboration, brainstorming, and ideation, not so much time just generating these artifacts. Even if we need them, let's let AI help with some of that heavy lifting. The principle of customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Well, we can use AI-powered analytics tools to help provide some insights into customer behavior and preferences, allowing us to have better conversations with our customers, internal or external, and really helping also with tools like chatbots and using sentiment analysis to gather and analyze customer feedback. The better empowered we are with real data about how our solutions are being used or how they could be used and how satisfied our users are, that's going to be very helpful to have a better conversation and not just get stuck on contracts. And then responding to change over following a plan. So as we can use machine learning models and artificial intelligence, how can we better be prepared for adaptations that may need to exist? How can these tools help us in the real time predict things before they happen rather than address them after they've happened? So these are just some of the ways that these tools, if used properly, can help us support, amplify, and make more efficient the things that we do today as proponents, advocates, and supporters of Agile ways of working. So in sessions like these, recorded or real time, what I find to be most valuable, and I think many of you likely feel the same way, That's the section that we're going to get to now, which is some real world examples based on the nature of the work that we do as Agile coaches, as Scrum Masters, Agile Delivery Leads, Agile project or program managers, whatever your title may be. If you're helping support, introduce, amplify, and improve Agile ways of working, I hope some of these will be real world examples that you can take back with you and start using and trying on your team to help address some of the opportunities that you may have today. So in our first scenario here, this is a challenge that I think a lot of us have, especially when we're working with new teams. We need to create good user stories, and that's a challenge. We really need to make sure that our user stories are really getting to the heart of what our users' needs are, what their goals are, and what their challenges are. And especially for those who are new as far as a new team, or new in the role of product owner, or folks who are also more familiar with traditional ways of working and requirements artifacts, moving towards not just a different format, but a different approach that's based on users, their needs, and their values can be really challenging. This is an area where just immediately generative AI can help with both the creation of and refinement of user stories. In this example, for an online grocery store, we've got some stories here that are generated from that user's perspective. They're kind of rough, the originals. They weren't awful, but they weren't great. But I simply put in the text, refine the following user stories, and then I pasted this export in text form, and you can see that ChatGPT responded in the appropriate format. It enumerated my items. So in our example, we made these pretty decent. Our good stories better. Ongoing interactions, which will be a trend that you'll hear throughout the remainder of this conversation we're having today. To me, it is really this context from the prior interactions. Just like if I'm talking to a human being, we don't forget what one another said 5 seconds ago, or at least hopefully we don't. It's part of the context of a conversation that allows it to really get to the actual final product that we'd like. So I put in a prompt, I got a good response back. The real beauty and benefit from my perspective is ongoing refinement. Whatever that response is, do I want it different? Do I want it to evolve? Do I want it to take it in a different direction? Did it respond with something that wasn't what I wanted? Whatever those cases may be, again, the analog of talking to a human being is really useful. We keep the conversation going until we get to the outcome that we'd like. So another high value scenario that I think of those of us in Agile ways of working would find value, that I do find value, I've used these in the real world with some of the teams I've worked with, using generative AI for new approaches for events and activities. So one of the challenges I think I have, especially for those who are following the Scrum framework, but this applies to others, these events can be very routine and then they become boring and ineffective. Variety, in some cases novelty, is going to get people more engaged than just the exact same thing in these common events. So we want to use these tools to help give us some ideas. In this particular instance, I asked to provide some new approaches to sprint planning. Now, as I look through these responses, I don't know if I would actually want to run with all of these, or even if they're all really appropriate for sprint planning, but it did give me an opportunity in its first response for me to think through what might be useful. So what are those ideas? Even if I don't want to take that item verbatim, again, we have now some responses here that will give us something that may perk another idea. And again, that same idea on the prior slide. That context and continuing the conversation is really what's most valuable. So in this case, and in most cases for me, I'll find one idea and I'll ideate. In this particular example, I'm interested in WSGIF, which is always a weird thing to try to say as far as that acronym, but I think WSGIF is an intriguing idea from its initial response. So from that, my next prompt was to provide a starter's guide for WSGIF in planning. From that, I asked for a starter's guide and using it in planning. Note that specifying level of expertise also is really valuable, and that's another pattern. If you're not already doing that, Don't treat these tools like the equivalent of a web search. Think about personas. Think about level of experience. Whether you're asking for yourself or on behalf of a different group, the responses will be materially different in some cases, and we've got some examples here. In this, I wanted a starter's guide. Maybe I've never been familiar with, I've never used WizGIF for planning. This is a very simple way to get started and a very sort of pedestrian explanation, which I think is very helpful. With that, though, when I say expert, same question. Note that the response, while both of them are still valid and valuable, when I ask for an expert's guide in using WizGIF in planning, the context of that question is the same, but the audience is considerably different because I was explicit about that level of detail. Where you may find this useful in your context can be the opposite of that. So in many cases, we get into trouble as those who are proponents of technology and process of when we're talking with business counterparts, users, stakeholders, etc. They should not have to understand a lot of how we do what we do. That is not really necessary for them to support what we do. And so how can we take complex concepts or approaches and use tools like generative AI, again, the opposite of this example, to simplify it and put it in business executive language, for example. Those are the sorts of things that can be really helpful when we think about who that audience may be. Another event that I think can be quite valuable, so we talked a little bit about planning. How about using AI to assist with retrospectives? That's another event. But rather than simply saying, give me some new ideas on how to do a retro, if I'm going to do a web search, I would just search for, different ideas on retrospectives, for example. Again, if we start thinking about using this tool, like if we were talking to an expert human, or if I was talking to one of you, or if you were talking to me and we said, hey, my last retro didn't go well. We just didn't have people talking and we didn't really come up with any things to improve. What can I do for the next one? Well, if I tried throwing that in a Google search, I don't know how well that would work out. But here, it really provides, based again on that specific context, where the challenges were in the retro. And then the responses are tailored based on these ideas. If we are having problems with these ceremonies, retrospectives is one of the most important from my perspective, perhaps the most important for really getting teams to be good and getting good teams to be better. How can we make sure that they're achieving the desired and intended purpose? So in these, with that specific challenge as far as people not talking and we didn't come up with a list of things to do, here are some ideas that I can consider. I may not do all of them, they may not all be applicable, but this is a very meaningful, actionable, and useful response that gives me some immediate things that I can consider doing for my next retrospective. And that is really a wonderful thing. And again, something that if I was talking to one of you, or if you were talking to me and we had the same question, perhaps these would be some of the things that we would come up with as well. So great tool and technique. We're not done though. So again, this idea of continuing that context and how valuable that can be. These subsequent prompts can help with action. So it's not like it is Groundhog Day and Bill Murray. It forgets every time. We have this context. It's not forgotten. So now that I know that I want to do something different in my next retro, I've got a new approach that it proposed. Hey, I like that. But I want to make sure, I'm a big proponent, by the way, some of you may cringe as Agilists. I'm a really big advocate of having agendas for all meetings so everyone knows exactly what we're going to do at the highest level, and so everyone can be aligned on the high level approach and structure of what we're doing. So with that, I don't want to just say retro. I'm going to actually leverage this tool based on that prior interaction that we just covered and have it generate my retro meeting agenda for me. And some of you may be thinking, well, how much time does that really save you? Is it really a big deal? To me, it's a very big deal. Having effective meetings in general is really supported by having a solid agenda that's structured so that people understand what's going to happen. This did the heavy lifting for me. So yes, I could have done this on my own. I could have done it with my own brain. It's not super complex, but why? Why should I have to do? And these are the sorts of examples that I really look to where generative AI can do so much, but we can start with some things that are really not super good uses of our time today, but things that need to be done. Creating a meeting agenda is a great example of something that I want to do, but to the extent that I can avoid spending a lot of time on generating that, that's great. Here's another one that can be really useful, using AI to analyze team metrics. So you may be saying, well, I've got a bunch of data analysis tools, or I've got Tableau, or I'm using Power BI, or whatever tool of choice you have. That's awesome. Those tools are amazing. Big fan of both of those and a number of other ones. But generative AI can do some stuff that at least I have never tried doing, and I'm not sure that it would work super well in these systems in the same way. So this first part, I could certainly do with any of these tools, maybe not through natural language like you see here, but I say find trends in this data for improving the next sprint. In my case, I just exported a data set from a Jira instance in CSV, comma separated value format, and I literally just plopped that right in from the clipboard into ChatGPT. You can see the columns that are there in the screen cap above. And then I was really blown away by what the tool did in this fairly simple example. So the first part of this is that it did indeed find trends. And again, standard tools that you have, if you configure and execute them properly, will give you these same data points of when things were created and updated, what those labels were, what the sprints were, etc. Note for a minute, though, I didn't ask it to categorize or segregate by those data points. All I said was find trends. It already looked at the data and categorized it based on some of the metadata and the columns and what it found as far as patterns within those columns. I did not ask for that. With traditional tools, those would be things that I would often have to specify. Look for this in this particular column or this particular view. So those trends are certainly useful, but here was the part, at least for me, that I sort of blew my mind initially, which was not only did it tell me what the trends were, but it went in and identified things specifically that I could consider doing based on what it found and patterns within the data. So I didn't have to do the analysis based on those columns. What I was provided as part of this response virtually immediately was some ideas based on what patterns it found in the data that I could use to make some changes to next sprint planning, backlog refinement, etc. So whether I would take on all of these, don't know, but what a great opportunity to have a tool that can tell me some ideas that I can execute on based on the trends that it found in the data. The second part of that generally is something up to this point that is requiring analysts or leaders or otherwise to actually start figuring out what to do with the challenges that we're seeing on the left-hand side. The right-hand side is already providing some areas where we can start in terms of addressing those issues. So with that, we've got some great ideas, some things that we can start right now. Before we get too far, just to pause. This is, as I like to speak in metaphors and analogies, probably too much, but speed bump, not roadblock, speed bump, not wall, but things for us to be thoughtful about as we proceed using these tools. There's some real world opportunities, but there's also some real world risks. So some more real world opportunities first. Chatbots for support and collaboration. Slack has AI-powered chatbots. They assist teams with notifications, integrations, and automations. Some of you may already be using GitHub's Copilot, a great tool for assisting developers in generating code. We don't want necessarily these solutions to replace our software engineers. I don't think that that's really possible, but certainly for a lot of areas where it can look for patterns in the data or look for syntactical issues or otherwise, that can be very valuable. how can it make good developers better? Automated documentation. So as mentioned prior, in some cases we still have to have documentation and artifacts. Let's let the tools use the capabilities that they have to generate this documentation as much as possible, so that we can still address those governance requirements, auditory, regulatory requirements, but to, again, have the human beings limited in the amount of effort that they have to do to make that happen. And then I really have a generalized allergy to calling human beings resources. In this context, I will sort of hold my nose and say resource allocation optimization. So TalentSoft employs AI analytics for workforce planning. While I don't really like the title there, I like the idea of how can we make sure that the organization and the individuals who are going to work on something are all best set up for success based on skill sets, and those skill sets being based on not something that's in a column in a database somewhere, but really based on real world experience of what those people have done in prior lives, and being able to get a little bit more specific about their skill sets, capabilities, and how they would best align to a particular initiative or effort. So in that context, getting the right people in the right combination of people at the right time on the right effort, I think, is incredibly valuable. But what are some of the limitations and risks? So there are a number of them. One of the first is, as much as I talked about context, outside of the context of a conversation, there's a lot of risk, a lack of contextual understanding that is inherent. And as I had mentioned on one of the introductory slides, spent 6 or so years at a artificial intelligence company, and one of the things that I found even back then, which was a number of years ago, the challenge of AI and a lot of the AI-based tools is that they're confident and wrong. And although we have a lot of examples of human beings who are also confident and wrong, the results that are coming out of these tools look very polished, and they don't have any sort of context of the level of confidence in that particular answer. So I think all of us have by now heard of some examples of case law, for example, being cited in some attorney filing. I think there was something yesterday, as when I'm recording this, late March, with Michael Cohen's lawyer citing 3 cases that didn't exist, and that was attributed to generative AI. So it's going to look accurate, and even if it's a complete fabrication, so have to be very careful there. And also, again, may not fully grasp the intent or specific requirements. This is of a software project. It can be of any initiative. So always be careful, and even if something seems confident, be careful about the accuracy and veracity of that particular response. On that note, quality and accuracy. So especially for software engineering, if you're using these tools, it can produce code or documentation that has errors, inaccuracies, or especially security vulnerabilities. Based on how that data is trained, it may be something that, the code actually is functional. Back in the day, we say, well, it compiles. But what other challenges may it have introduced? We don't always know, so we need to be thoughtful about that. And it also may not always adhere to best practices or coding standards. That's going to be really important for you to just do your own due diligence. Another, for many of us, we are often working in very specific domains. And since all of AI is based on data, and the more data, the better the quality of these solutions, if you're in a very niche area, whatever that may be, business domain or particular skill, technology, whatever the case may be, if there is a significantly smaller amount of data, building models based on small data sets is just inherently going to be problematic. And then lack of creativity. This may be a subject of extensive debate, but for me, at least in the foreseeable future, these tools, even though they are generating things that look creative, they are composites. I sometimes use the metaphor of a DJ, not a band. I love a good DJ. But that said, it is a composite of others based on size of data. And so if you truly want creativity, that is still a human endeavor, although it can certainly help with creative endeavors. But having, I think all of us by now have also seen a lot of the images that have been generated by generative AI. They're not really that creative. They're interesting and they're novel, but most of them very much are easily identifiable as generated by artificial intelligence, and they're honestly not very compelling in most cases. They may be novel, but they certainly don't replace a really good artist, musician, etc. Some other risks and limitations of AI for us to be cognizant of. And again, I want to be absolutely clear. I'm an advocate. We're all here for a reason that we want to use these tools. So these are just things to be cognizant of. They shouldn't stop us, but they should be considerations as we use these tools to make sure that we're not using them improperly or areas that are putting us, our companies, or anybody else at risk. Ethical concerns. So one of the challenges that we know exists is that these models are trained on data largely from the internet and public sources, and we have all spent some time on the internet, and we all know that the quality of a lot of the conversations and the content that's out there are not our best moments in some cases as far as humanity goes. So these models are trained on that data. If there is bias out there, which there obviously is, that is often going to be baked into the models, and we want to make sure we don't overcorrect. I think everyone has probably heard about what happened with Google's Gemini and trying to root out bias by adding some additional tooling to ensure diversity was there. That pendulum swung, I think, from some of our perspectives a little bit too far, but that is going to be an ongoing challenge, is how can we make sure that we are cognizant of and mitigating the issues with bias that is inherently in the data that has built these models. Over automation, back to the most recent example, not the only one, of Michael Cohen's lawyers. Over automation, if we are using these tools without properly vetting what they're doing, we're putting ourselves at risk, and it's only us to blame. In this example, we talk about code that's being generated, lack of human oversight there, but I think that applies to in any instance where we're using these tools. We want to be thoughtful about, are we outsourcing our brain? We really want to be careful about anything that's generated and how we incorporate it into what we do. And relatedly, limited validation. So if the toxic combination of over automation and limited validation, these outputs should be validated by human experts. And some of you in these instances will be those human experts to say, yeah, this doesn't make sense here. I understand why it was suggested based on a large language model, but that's not going to be something that we do here. So where there is limited validation, please be thoughtful about what you do with those responses. You may have quality, security, or functionality standards in your organization. The tool doesn't necessarily adhere to those things. So caveat emptor, as they used to say on eBay, may still say that, buyer beware. Use the tools, but also understand where you need to still be in charge of vetting the responses before you use them and how you use them. So in closing, some final thoughts about moving forward with generative AI, wherever you are in your journey, but especially if you haven't started yet or you're just getting started, here's some thoughts. So how do we proceed quickly but thoughtfully? Here's a couple of thoughts for us to get going, but to do it, as mentioned on the prior slides, in a way that's going to be best for you, your organization, and to use these tools and understanding their limitations. The first, and really be thoughtful about any data that you put into any of these tools. There are going to be some restrictions on its use at your organization. Could be HIPAA if it's healthcare, PII, PCI for financial services, or anywhere where you've got customer personally identifiable data, etc. We can do the alphabet soup of all of those regulatory requirements, but be very thoughtful about what data is input, knowing that some of it really can be baked back into the models. What I would say, and this isn't well publicized, at least from my perspective, but if you're using ChatGPT, if you go to settings, data controls, history, and training, that is specifically how you can turn off this function in ChatGPT. From my perspective, you don't lose a whole lot by losing the history that you had in your historical chats, but something to check out. Again, even if you choose this option and you disable these inputs so that the data doesn't go back to their model, still be thoughtful about what your organization's requirements are. And some organizations don't allow the use of these tools, period, hard stop. Another thing that's really useful, as alluded to earlier, think about in terms of when you are using these tools, think in terms of roles. I can't overstate roles and personas. So the role of a researcher for you, am I looking for an expert opinion on a given topic? Or am I looking, even though I don't want to outsource all of my creativity through writing or creation, do I need help summarizing, detailing, or refining a written artifact? I find this one to really be valuable, especially summarizing by different persona of who the audience is, to make sure that I am putting a response in terms that make sense to that particular individual. And a new hire right out of college is going to have a different context and language and way of looking at things than somebody who is a business executive of a Fortune 500 company. I may have to articulate those same concepts to both of those people. How do I do that in a thoughtful way without losing the actual message? Creator, do I need some ideas to get me started on a new initiative or task? So again, don't outsource all of your creativity to these tools, but if you've got writer's block, if you're not sure where to start, I also find this to be an invaluable tool, especially for me in areas where I have a lot of experience on something. And I need, like the examples of the retrospective. I've been doing some of these things for a while. I need something to sort of shake it up in my head a little bit. What's a good way to do that? So taking a concept I already know and asking it to provide us an introductory level of understanding on that thing can be a great way to get started. Another just way to make these tools really useful and usable for you, whatever your context is, be explicit on what your request is in your inputs. So if I do want that expert opinion, I ask specific questions to gain perspective, explanations, or definitions on a particular topic. As I've mentioned a few times already now, provide that level of audience. Who are they? You can even with ChatGPT specify grade level of reading comprehension if you want to be that specific. And I've done that. The responses are kind of interesting. But you don't have to be that granular, but be thoughtful about who's the persona. Who are you trying to have this conversation with? Is it for problem solving? Give scenarios and context for the problem. So when I Google search, I'm going to Google search. These tools are materially different. I can have scenarios and context for a problem. The more data, the better, as you saw in that example of looking at my Jira for the last 3 sprints or so. But I don't just plop data in and say, tell me what to do. I talk in detail about what I'm trying to address, my specific text. I don't just want a better retro. I want a retro where people are speaking up because they're uncomfortable speaking. What can I do? That's a different challenge for my retro than somebody else's challenge maybe for their retro, where maybe their problem is they got too much conversation and they need to figure out how to refine that so they only get the top level ideas. Those are both retros. They're both not working the way that we'd like them to. But the problem statement for retro 1 versus 2 are materially different. So more context, the better quality and specificity of those responses. If I'm drafting or refining written content, provide the requested artifact with as much detail as possible. As mentioned, audience, even reading level, but number of words. I will specify 3 paragraphs, bullet point format, sub-bullet points, distill the following from 10 bullet points to 3. Be as specific as you can and you will get much better results. Also provide the format for the output as well as if desired. If you're generating presentations, you can say in slide format. I know there are tools that'll generate the slides for you. That's not what I use. But I do have it generate the structure of an outline that I then can actually build content from. And then if I'm summarizing or refining existing content, provide that existing content as the input, and again, provide those details to the audience level and level of detail as needed. And then just some last thoughts on moving forward. And thank you again for taking the time to watch this video and to spend the time to learn and to grow. These final high-level recommendations, just get started. Start today. If you're not sure where to start with a real-world challenge, not a theoretical one. There's got to be something that could be improved in terms of the way that your teams are working. Start with one scenario that's real for you. And if you really can't come up with something, I'd be surprised. But if you can't, look to your last retro. I'm sure that there's at least one item that came out of that retro that you could work on and you may not know what to do. Use this to get started. And if you have nothing that came out of your last retro, you should put that in there, and that may be where you want to start. Everybody should have something coming out of every retro. Next is experiment, experiment, experiment. Again, it's not a browser. There's a lot of folks that are using these tools and putting the exact same thing they would do in a Google search box. Have a conversation. Try variations, as mentioned, based on audience, experience, role, and persona. Try GPT for Agilists if you've got ChatGPT 4, if you're paying for the paid version. There's a lot of GPTs that are specific. Just search for Agile in the GPT store, and you can get some specific stuff for Agile ways of working. Understand that progress is just ridiculously fast at this point. Follow happenings on LinkedIn or other sources. Consider training, including certified instructor-led, and then leverage curated resources provided by my company, Lightspeed. Agile VMO Copilot is in the ChatGPT store, by the way. And then that should give you a really good path to get started. So with that, thank you for taking the time. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Jay Halberstadt, and love to continue the conversation. Thank you so much.